50% of the population, but 0% of Oval Office holders. That's right, no woman has ever held America's top job in the presidency's 235-year history. But is that going to change with Kamala Harris? In the 70s, these were some of the attitudes that women in politics had to face.
Would you vote for a woman for president?
Well, I don't think they could handle the job.
A man can do a better job than a woman.
Would you vote for a woman for president?
Not as yet. I don't think the women are ready for a presidency.
Over 50 years have passed. Is the USA ready for a female commander-in-chief?
We have historically considered leaders as white and male, the head of the nation, literally often called the father of the nation.
And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother.
You're coming up with all kinds of reasons and excuses. Part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president.
Taylor Swift has endorsed Kamala Harris.
And that's the type of courage we need in America to stand up.
Many democracies have elected female leaders, but not the United States. Kamala Harris is no stranger to being the first, from becoming the first woman to hold the position of California's Attorney General to the first female vice president. She might have what it takes to be America's first female president, but are voters going to back her?
I don't vote for women in big positions.
Why?
Because I believe the Bible, a man should be over a woman.
It is about winning the narrative battle because little girls are listening to see what is possible.
We have still not shattered that highest and hardest glass ceiling, but someday someone will, and hopefully sooner than we might think right now.
We've had notions and stereotypes about what leadership should look like. We have historically considered leaders as strong, tough, independent, assertive, things that haven't as often been associated with women.
But throughout history, some women tried to challenge this. Let's go back to 1964. Meet Margaret Chase Smith. She was a Republican and became the first woman to actively seek the presidential nomination of a major political party. At the time, politics was truly a man's world. She didn't become the presidential candidate, but it was an important moment.
Regardless of what happened to me, what was really important was that through me, for the first time, the women of the United States had an opportunity to break the barrier against women being seriously considered for the presidency of the United States.
These were the 1960s, a decade of changes. More women than ever were getting paid jobs. In 1966, the National Organization for Women was formed. But perhaps the biggest change at the time was happening in the bedroom. By the end of the 60s, more than 80% of wives of childbearing age were using contraception. Things were looking different for women. In 1968, Shirley Chisholm became the first black woman to be elected to the United States Congress. But she didn't stop at that. 4 years later, she announced her bid to run for the Democratic presidential nomination.
I stand before you today to repudiate the ridiculous notion that the American people will not vote for a qualified candidate simply because he is not white or because she's not a male.
Chisholm became the first black woman to run for a major party's presidential nomination. But, like Margaret Chase Smith, she also didn't get enough votes to win. Despite the defeat, it was another milestone for women. But things were far from equal. By the mid-1980s, feminists across the country had reasons to be hopeful. A woman finally appeared on the ticket of the Democratic Party.
Against Ronald Reagan and George Bush. Representative Ferraro, nominated for vice president last night, told the delegates that the issue isn't what America can do for women, but what women can do for America.
Women to run for our nation's second highest office you send a powerful signal to all Americans. There are no doors we cannot unlock.
But the Democrats lost, and Ronald Reagan was elected president. Another defeat, but also another step forward for women's representation. Fast forward to 2008. Hillary Clinton gave this speech after campaigning, but losing, to be the Democratic Party's candidate in the upcoming election.
From now on, it will be unremarkable for a woman to win primary state victories. Unremarkable to have a woman in a close race to be our nominee. Unremarkable to think that a woman can be the President of the United States. And that is truly remarkable, my friends.
But 8 years later, she did manage to break a barrier. She became the first woman to run for president in the history of America, facing, but losing again, to Donald Trump in 2016. But hang on, there is a woman we've overlooked so far. Someone who was born before all the women we've just listed.
She is known and loved all over this world, both by kings and commoners, by citizens of democracies and dictatorships, by Eskimos beyond the timberline and by natives below the equator. Name your countries in between, she's been there and gave them help and courage to help themselves. This is her story, and her name is Eleanor Roosevelt.
In 1921, before he was elected president, Franklin Roosevelt was struck by a polio attack, which left him paralysed from the waist down. Eleanor got used to tending to her wheelchair-using husband and even campaigned on his behalf. But when he won the election, she had to step up. And she actually ended up doing a lot of the exhausting travel, which would have usually fallen to the president, including visiting and assessing infrastructure projects and being an influential advisor to her husband. So could it be that America has already had a female president, although a behind-the-scenes one? Perhaps it's a bit of a stretch, but some would agree. All these women broke barriers in their own way, but so far no one has succeeded in getting the top job. Why is that? This graph tracks the electorate's willingness to vote for a female president. Americans were asked whether they would vote for a woman if their party nominated a generally well-qualified person for president who happened to be a woman. In 1937, only 33% of people surveyed answered yes. By 1944, it rose to 48%. But from there, it took more than 50 years to cross the 90% threshold, which was finally reached in 1999. Willingness peaked to 96% in 2011, but has since slipped back to 93%. It's been 8 years since Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump. Although, let's not forget, she did win the popular vote. And perhaps surprisingly, Trump performed better with women than expected. Look at this graph. Far more women, 54%, voted for Clinton than for Trump, 39%. But when we consider ethnicity, Trump was slightly more popular with white women overall, while black and Hispanic women voted overwhelmingly more for Clinton.
White women have voted for Republicans for decades. So it was not surprising in 2016 that white women would continue to vote for the Republican candidate. What actually was surprising is that you started to see a shift among particularly college-educated white women. It started with Hillary Clinton in 2016, and it has continued in every election, midterm and presidential election since then, where that particular group of women has moved more towards Democratic support.
This is why you might have heard that it is going to be suburban white women in the swing states who will decide this election. So let's have a recap. We're in 2016 and Clinton has just lost to Trump. But two main events are about to impact American society.
What's really interesting, if you look at the change from when Hillary Clinton ran in 2016 to 2024, it's it's a lot more than just we had a woman run then and we had a woman run now for president. So much has happened in our society that I think changes the terrain that Kamala Harris is navigating.
Say it loud, say it clear. Kavanaugh's not welcome here.
First, in 2017, the Me Too movement gained popularity, encouraging women who had experienced sexual harassment and assault to share their stories.
Don't try to divide us. Do not try to divide us.
The movement sparked a global conversation about holding powerful men accountable and advocating for changes in workplace culture. But while Me Too was an empowering moment for women and marginalised groups, some critics say it promoted a culture of fear in the workplace and resulted in men feeling alienated or uncertain about how to behave in social settings. Whether you agree or not, data shows that there is a growing gender gap between men and women. Take a look at this. In 2020, in the aftermath of the Me Too movement, roughly half of Americans, 51%, said the label feminist described their views at least somewhat well. But in 2024, more Americans are rejecting the label, and that percentage has gone down to 35%. And there is a massive divide when gender comes into the equation, especially between young men and women, with 55% of young women identifying as feminist compared to just 31% of young men. So what does this mean for the election? When asked whether American society does not do enough to help young men succeed, both Trump voters and Harris voters agreed. But when asked the same question about young women, it was a different picture. Only 35% of Trump voters agreed with the statement, compared to 68% of Harris voters. Again, what does that suggest? That people voting for Trump are more concerned with the status of men, while Harris voters are more concerned with the status of women. Then, in 2022, the US Supreme Court overturned the federal right to abortion.
There's no point in saying good morning, because it certainly is not one. This morning, the radical Supreme Court is eviscerating Americans' rights and endangering their health and safety.
This galvanised women, and some states saw the number of females registering to vote in the midterm elections surge.
I've had an abortion. I'll speak about that openly. I was 19 years old. I still sit with the grief of that. I sit with the shame of that. If we make that choice, it doesn't mean we're happy about it. But at least we had the opportunity. I didn't have the funding to take care of a child the way I wanted to.
Of course, not every woman supports abortion in America.
So happy! That's a blessing. It's a miracle. What about victims?
But polls consistently show that women tend to be more concerned with reproductive rights than men.
Just this week, a major medical journal reported that after Roe was overturned, infant mortality in this country rose, in large part because women are being forced to carry fetuses that won't survive to term. One woman spent 22 days in jail on murder charges after she miscarried in her own bathroom. If we don't get this election right, your wife, your daughter, your mother, we as women will become collateral damage to your rage.
All this could be a good thing for Kamala Harris. She has always been vocal about reproductive freedom, and this might help her get the votes of women in key states.
I've traveled across our country, and women have told me their stories. Husbands and fathers have shared theirs. Stories of women miscarrying in a parking lot, developing sepsis, losing the ability to ever again have children, all because doctors are afraid they may go to jail for caring for their patients.
But remember, while candidates' positions on abortion is definitely at play in this election, the majority of polls suggest that it is not a top voting issue, usually coming behind the economy and immigration.
Who did you vote for today?
President Trump, or Vance Trump.
And what motivates you to make that decision?
The border, the economy, women's rights, I think, should be left up to the state. I've had an abortion, so that's all in the past. And I don't know, I just think we need some change again.
We had a look at some of the women who made, over time, cracks in the glass ceiling, as well as some of the key moments that helped shape gender politics in the last decade. A lot is at stake in this election.
The story of my life and the history of our country is that progress is possible but not guaranteed. We have to fight for it and never, ever give up.
Imagine our daughters growing up seeing what's possible with no ceilings, no limitations. Imagine our grandmothers. Imagine what they feel right now. Those who have lived to see this historic day.
But one thing is for sure, being the leading candidate among women is a great advantage. Since the 1980s, more women than men have turned out to vote in every presidential election.
Women are the most reliable voters. They outnumber and they outvote men, and they've done so for decades. They are not monolithic. Obviously, there are conservative women who also vote, and again, vote in high numbers. But if you are the Democratic candidate, and you know that there is a gender gap, that women are still more likely to vote for the Democrat than the Republican than are their male counterparts, and they're reliable, you really do need to try to appeal directly to them.
So in the end, it might come down to women to decide whether America is ready to have a first female president.